Join lifelong Star Wars fans Lauren and Steph as they dive into the world of Star Wars fan fiction, discussing a new fic each month, breaking down the writing style, characters, canon relationship, and more. This is your source for Star Wars fan fiction recommendations. So come on and find out why it's one hell of a fanfic.
Hey y'all, I'm Lauren, and welcome to One Hell of a Fanfic, where we talk about a new Star Wars fanfic every month. And I'm here with Steph tonight. Steph, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. It has been a busy week so far, but that's okay. We're getting it done. We're getting through it.
I feel the same way.
It's that time of year, I guess. But you know what? I say that at any time of year, so that's
Yep.
just my thing I say. It's always that time of year. Yeah. So before we get started talking about our fanfic that we read this month, though, I did want to give Tessiette a shout out. So a couple months ago, we read The Eternal Spring by Tessiette, and they wrote up the coolest response that they posted to Tumblr talking all about like their experience listening to our show as an author and kind of like it was almost felt like we were having a conversation with them.
Absolutely. It was so cool to be able to go and read their response to us, but then answered all of the questions that we had going throughout the entire thing, and not just a little bit, in full detail.
Yeah, and there were some things that they said too that I was like, "Oh my god, I missed that," but that makes so much sense when you say it like that.
Yes.
So it was cool as a reader kind of hearing from the author as well. So big thank you to Tessia for like taking the time to like talk to us and like respond to what we were saying, and it's just really really cool. It made me feel super good to hear that like somebody whose work that we like also likes what we're doing too. So I just loved that. So that was awesome. And it also made me excited too to read more of their work too. So Tessia, be warned, we might be taking a look at some of your other stuff.
Yeah. We just want more feedback. We love it.
But yeah, so like if anyone like if any authors want to reach out to us, like please feel welcome to do so. We love hearing from y'all and like hearing what y'all's thoughts are. So yeah, staying in touch is always great. But okay, let's go ahead and get started talking about our fanfic for this month. This month we read Reflection by Fyre, which was an original trilogy fanfic. And I really, really liked this one. I feel like it's probably one of my favorite ones that we've read so far, but what were your kind of just, like, overall thoughts about it?
I felt the same way. This was so well written, and it was so easy to digest and really see where the author was going with it, and it filled in all of those little gaps that we were looking for in canon. And it was just an overall fun read.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Did you wanna kinda give us, like, the little details on this one?
Absolutely. So this fan fiction was written and finished back in 2016. It is only one chapter long, making it 7,000 words, which I don't know about you, but it took me less than an hour to go all the way through it.
Yeah, something like that. That sounds about right.
Yeah. This is not a romance at all, but don't worry, folks. We're going to fix that next month. But this was not a romance. So spice level was a solid 0.
Yeah, we've been taking a little break from romance for the past couple months, and I think we're getting ready to get back into it, but it's nice to switch it up from time to time.
Canon relationship for this one was canon compliant. There was a little bit of difference from canon, but it did a good job sticking to where canon was when this was written.
Yeah, like, the differences between canon, it's like it's not really huge details that we're talking about that divert, so it feels like it could definitely fit.
And there was no tropes in this one. It was Did you see any? Because I did not see any tropes.
No, this one wasn't really relying on any tropes that I could see.
So what was it about?
Yeah, so the author summary, which is just in the little author note included at the beginning, I'll go ahead and read that off, which is Leia still remembered darkened cells, probe droids, heavy metal hands on her shoulders as she was forced to watch Alderaan burn. She remembered Hoth. She remembered Cloud City. She remembered waking, gasping, haunting by the hiss of his mask in the night. The thought that he could appear to them even after death had terrified her then. Now looking at the man on the bridge, she knew exactly who she was seeing. And so that is a quote from the story, which really it kind of summarizes where we're starting off. But so why do you think people should read this one?
Like I mentioned earlier, it really kind of fills in some of those gaps and the things that we don't get to see. Plus, it's so heartwarming, and you get these behind the scenes look at the things like mostly Leia and Anakin actually getting time to talk.
Yeah, like, and that actually them because we do see, like, there's a few mentions in canon of her trying to, like, come to terms with this, but, like, getting to see an example of how what it would have been if they could have actually talked and kinda gotten to the bottom of it, that I feel like is what made this fanfic really special.
Why did you
Um,
want to read it?
yeah, so I would say that for me, it was seeing so like we saw in canon, we saw Luke come to terms. I mean, this is kind of just building off of what you already said, but we saw Luke come to terms with like making peace with Anakin. And it was very simple for him to do because he felt Anakin change. Anakin saved his life, or Vader, Anakin, whatever. You get what I mean. Saved his life at the end. So it was very simple for Luke to see the evidence of that change and kind of move on. Leia never got any of that. She experienced like all of the worst parts of Vader firsthand multiple times and didn't get to actually see the evidence of him change. So I think what was really special about this fic is actually seeing an opportunity for her to having all of that in the past, a chance to actually be able to move past it in a way that I feel like was very believable for these characters. And that's really the way that that's handled is really what makes this one of my favorite fics that I've read.
So, moving on to segment 2 of this fan fiction podcast is our spoiler section. So, be warned. So, let's talk about canon first. We've already mentioned that it's canon compliant. Uh, some of the things I found interesting that's canon related was the fact that they both showed old man Anakin as a Force ghost and Anakin as his younger self, which kind of almost fixes canon in that way of, and because later on they gonna explain it a bit more, sort of. But when we see it in canon, because of the changes they made, just for whatever reason they changed it, like it was confusing to those of us. We're like, why would you do that? But
Oh,
this
I
kind
get
of
it why they
embraced it.
changed it. Wait, you mean at the end of Return of the Jedi when instead of middle-aged Anakin, we see Hayden Christensen?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it that that change probably was a little unfair to the original actor, but I gotta say, like, seeing Hayden Christensen Force Ghost in that moment, growing up in the prequel generation, that's moving. That's hard to I don't know. I kinda get it why they did that, even though I understand the issues, but
I am also not complaining, but when we watch it and you're like, that's strange, this kind of almost puts a band aid on it. Like, okay, here we go. We fixed it. Retcon
true.
that one.
Yeah, and that's what we love about fanfic. We get a chance to make it all work and we don't have to choose between one or the other. But so like what did you think about the plot of this one?
I like the plot of this one a lot. I like how it spanned over a lot of time, but it did so gracefully and smoothly. It didn't need to say, and 2 months later.
I mean, I agree that it is kind of like a natural progression of time. There's no part of it that really feels like jarring or sudden. Like it feels like we're kind of moving along through Leia's life in a way that it doesn't like take you out of the story, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Um and it makes sense too because like, I really appreciate that this this process of her coming to terms with Anakin, it's not an immediate process. It does take time. And knowing Leia as a character, it fits that she's not just going to immediately forgive him, which I guess technically she never does forgive him, but she does at least come to accept like the truth of who he was and she doesn't have like resentment over it. Um but yeah, I feel like the way that the plot was built, it was just I felt like it was a very well handled sort of growth of their relationship that we're getting to see.
Other things about the plot and writing is that it was written in third person, which I think was pretty awesome to see. And well, it was appropriate for what we were watching and reading. And the length of it, I think, was spot on. It was long enough where we got the details we needed to without kind of drawing out scenes, but in short enough where we could hop between the time span and still get all of everything we needed to.
Yeah, each scene had a purpose and it was clear to see what that purpose was. It didn't feel like there was any unnecessary filler that we didn't really need to be taken through as the reader. It all felt like it was very deliberate.
So what would you say really was done well in the fic also?
In addition to kind of what I was already getting into about the growth of her relationship with Anakin and kind of like how that was handled over time. I mean, that was a big one for me. But in addition to that, I would also say that the way that this author highlights and emphasizes the commonalities between Anakin and Leia and Padme and Luke. And I thought that was really cool because usually what we see is the opposite. Like I feel like people are always talking about like Leia and Padme had a lot in common and then Anakin and Luke had a lot in common. So seeing that switched and looking at well, Leia and Anakin had these things in common, these character traits, and Luke and Padme had these character traits in common. I thought that was really cool and it was kind of like a different understanding of those characters in that like cuz I remember at one point it was mentioned how like Anakin, had like he was very like charismatic, had a lot of bravado, and then Padme was a lot more like a kind of a softer person, and how Luke has some similar mannerisms with her, and Leia has those mannerisms in common with Anakin. So I really appreciated that, and that actually did make me be like, oh yeah, like they did have more in common than I previously thought. Um, and then so kind of along those same lines, the differences between Luke's experience with like growing up and how that kind of set him up to accept Anakin versus Leia's experiences growing up and how that set her up to maybe not have the same sort of interaction where like and keep in mind this was written before Kenobi, which does kind of affect what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
But like talking about how Luke had he didn't really have the same kind of family life that Leia had. Leia had parents. She wasn't missing parents in her life, but Luke was. But I mean, with the Kenobi show, we kind of see how maybe that's not really the case.
Right.
But at the time that this fic was written, that was kind of like our understanding of that character. So, but yeah, so that was really what I thought was really cool about this fic is it did make me kind of have some different thoughts about Luke and Leia and Anakin and Padme, which is crazy to say after all these years. So what about you? Did you have anything else that you felt like was like super well done in this one?
I did. Going back to the writing, I really liked how how sometimes we see in writing they kind of write it the same way you would kind of see it in a cinematic universe. They always have to feel like they need to describe every little detail along the way. He said this, turned his face, looked my direction, looked down, looked up, and said this again. Instead of that, this author did an amazing job implying that movement was happening without having to say he said, she said, they did this. And it made it for a much smoother read, along with you get all of those pictures in your head because she paints them so well.
Yeah, it's like the prose was very clear, but it wasn't like too
Wordy.
methodical, I guess you could say.
Hmm.
Like there was still you could still feel like that art to it.
Absolutely. And I like that even though this fan fiction was so short, there was clear character development within Leia, especially, but even in Force Ghost Anakin, which well, I wasn't expecting because he's dead. So,
Yeah, I do
you're not
have
expecting that.
one of my questions that I'm gonna ask you later is kind of about that, but but
Well,
yeah, the Anakin I mean, not the Anakin, but the Leia development was, like, clear to see how she's kind of, like she's learning as she's going through this process as well.
and it was done so smoothly. It wasn't like you said earlier, it didn't feel forced or pushed along in any kind of way.
Yeah,
is
like you
natural.
can
That's how you put it.
see yeah, like you can see how she came to the thoughts and the conclusions that she came to. Like it's very believable.
Absolutely. And the author stuck really well to what I felt like the canon version of Leia would be.
As you were reading this, did you have any reactions or emotions that really stood out to you?
Well, I definitely cried at one point. But no, it was just heartwarming. Overall, it wasn't like one of those fan fictions that were up and down, but it was heartwarming and really kind of made you feel like, yes, that completed something for me. How about you?
Yeah, seeing her learn who her parents fully were, that did kind of make me sit back and be like, "Whoa," because what we have known so far is like people tell Leia about who her parents were. We see her like knowing like the facts of the scenario. Like I'm thinking about like in Bloodline, the book by Claudia Gray, and in the Princess and the Scoundrel, those two novels. Um, yeah. Princess and the Scoundrel by Beth Revis. I had to look at my book behind me for a second. But like so in those two books, it is mentioned like Leia's trying to come to terms with the fact that Darth Vader is her father. But she never, of course, gets to interact with Anakin. She never gets to actually see who Anakin was or who Padme was. And so in this fic, like getting to see her watch the footage from R2 after Anakin like tells her how to access it, that was really, really cool because she's not just being told the facts of who her parents were. She is seeing that they were really great, impressive, effective people, and kind of like seeing where she came from and seeing like before Anakin became Vader, he was uh, e- I mean, this is a little bit debatable, but he was mostly a good man. I mean,
His intentions were good.
right, like you get where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah.
But like even, like she sees kind of for herself who they were, which is way different than just being told. And so getting to see that, I that hit me in an emotional way because it was just powerful and it was a really expertly handled way, like her watching the R2 footage. I never would have even thought of that, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So I loved that. That was impactful for me.
I love that somewhere in something finally it says, "Oh, hey, let's put together the fact that R2 and Anakin were like connected." And yeah, of course he knows who that is. Why have we touched on that in canon? Because I'm not remembering that right now.
I know that it has been talked about, like, people have gotten into this before about how, like, why did R2 not say anything?
Maybe it's this. Maybe it's because there was the locked memory banks that only Anakin knew
I
how to
think
access.
you know what? I was thinking about this, and I think that in canon, there is an explanation somewhere. Like,
There's
I
got to
do
be.
think that there is some sort of an explanation, and whatever it was is just escaping me right now. But I know
It's
that this is an
escaping me
issue.
too.
Yeah, I know that this is an issue that has been brought up because it's like, why would you not say anything? Because R2 is
Right.
obviously it's like or wouldn't that be so funny if he just knew the whole time and was just like, "Nah, I'm not touching that. I'm just gonna."
That would be within character.
I know,
I would believe that.
I could honestly see that. As frustrating as that is, like, I could believe that. Um, but yeah, so I like that explanation as well and I think it's cool how, it's very fitting that Anakin is the only one who knows how to access it, so
Right.
I thought that was cool.
I was momentarily confused when R2 didn't understand there was somebody talking. And I was like, wait, droids can't see ghosts. There it is.
I Me too. And then I was like and then that got me to thinking, so like a force ghost, does a force ghost appear to people who are not force sensitive? Has that been addressed ever?
I don't think it has, but I would say yes, because the force flows through all of us.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point.
Mm.
But that did get me to thinking. And I was like, I don't know if that's ever I can't think of that example ever happening before of somebody who's not force sensitive seeing a force ghost.
No, I can't think of anything either. So one of My favorite parts of the entire fan fiction was the very end. I love how it felt so fitting that Leia did not end up forgiving Anakin for any of it. It which feels right. There's no there's she saw too much, she experienced too much. But it was just beautiful how she just looked at him or didn't even look at him and was like, I understand. And then that really hits you right in the feels that in the end she understood what he was going through and that's what he needed and that's what she needed.
Yeah, and I think that her seeing what she saw through R2's eyes, I think that was key to her getting to
Mm-hmm.
that understanding. Is that kind of how you felt too?
Yes, absolutely.
I also thought it was fitting that she didn't just, like, forgive him, because that does feel very much like a Luke kinda thing, and Leia was a bit more what's the word I'm looking for? Skeptical, perhaps, like, than Luke
Yeah.
was. Just she was just a more skeptical person in general, I feel like. So it makes sense that Luke would be someone who is able to be generous with their forgiveness, whereas Leia would be someone who would kinda hold it a little bit closer, not just I mean
She's got to protect herself and so many others, including like her heart. She's got to protect that too.
right. So, yeah, I thought it was very fitting for them to reach that point where she's like, "I saw what I saw, I understand how this occurred. I don't hate you, I don't resent you, but, like, you know, leaving it at that."
So something that came across in this fan fiction that made me actually rethink a whole bunch of things within canon itself was the one line when it's unrelated kind of where Leia talks about Luke is off reawakening the Jedi. And for some reason that sparked something in my head about how Anakin was supposed to balance the Force. And I've always thought of it that way. Like, oh, he's balancing the Force and he balanced the Force by killing off the Jedi. And so therefore there's only a couple of Sith and there's only a couple of Jedi. Now everything's balanced. It didn't actually occur to me that he could be also balancing the Force by having Luke and Leia and what their future roles would be in the universe. With Luke reawakening the Jedi Order and Leia reawakening the Senate and Hope.
Oh, interesting. And you know what's funny too about what you just said is that my interpretation of Anakin being the chosen one is different from both of those. So,
Do go on.
well, because for me, I always felt like the reason he was the chosen one is because he went all the way to the dark side and then turned back. That was kind of
Oh.
like what I always thought. Is like that was the balance, was the going there and then coming back. But I like those other 2, like, options. I think that's what's cool about it is, like, the prophecy of the chosen one is it's, like, so, like, kind of, worded in such a mystical way, like, there's lots of different ways you could interpret it and lots of different, ways that you could see that being fulfilled, that it's cool to, like, have, like, those different perspectives coming into it.
And it gives Star Wars fans something to argue about, which they like doing.
Oh, and we totally need, like, so much more ammunition to argue about. We don't have enough.
So, in the end, what is your favorite scene?
Okay, favorite scene. Okay, I do wanna throw out a favorite line real quick, which I meant to say earlier and I forgot to mention, and I can't let it pass me by because I thought it was such a good line. It was when she says or Leia's thinking to herself, "He smiled, but it was the saddest smile she'd ever seen." I was like, "That is Anakin in a nutshell." I thought that was nail right on the head.
It was perfect.
Yeah, enough said about that line. But so I loved that. That was one of my favorite parts. But my favorite scene was that scene with R2 really when he's telling her how to access the footage in R2. He tells Luke to say this weird thing to R2 and it's like the only time that Anakin laughs in their presence, I think, if I remember correctly. And just kind of like his reaction to seeing that, oh my gosh, like that's R2 and he's still like in the family. So I thought that was really special.
Yeah.
What was yours?
I have a couple little ones. Within the first couple of paragraphs, Leia's leaving the little hut and looks over at Han, who is all cuddled with the little Ewok cubs, and I thought that was adorable. The way
That
she
was
described
so
it as
cute.
like he says he's so tough, but There he is again, cuddled with the babies.
That reminds me so much of like, like have you seen that meme that's like grandpa says he hates cats, but then it's like grandpa with the cat and then he's like cuddling the cat or whatever. That just made
I,
me think of that.
it's spot on. Yes,
I mean,
that.
yeah, it's just the same thing as that Han Han cuddling the Ewok cubs. I thought that was so cute, and I just love Ewoks, so I just can't get enough of them.
A touching scene for me was where Leia and Anakin were talking, and Leia was 100% sure that Anakin did not kill Padme. And the way she reassured him and just his response to that made me tear up. It was a much needed scene to be able to see Anakin be able to accept and just hold it in his heart that he didn't actually kill his life, the love of his life.
Do you view Anakin not killing Padme, do you view that as what occurred in canon? Or do you view that as like a canon divergent detail?
I don't know. In my head, I don't think he killed her. I mean, I don't know what killed her because it's
I mean, I don't
vague.
think we have an answer. I don't think we have an answer in canon. I'm just curious as to how you interpreted that moment because I feel like that's another one of those things that could go in different directions, like depending on how you look at it.
I don't know. I know what I want.
I know what I want and that's all that matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, I like the interpretation of it not being him
yeah.
that we see in this story. I don't
It's
know
very
if it
believable.
yeah, I don't know if it for me it does feel canon divergent, but I like this version better.
Same.
So, that's all that matters is at least in fan fiction world, that's what matters. So, I'm going with that.
Yes. Oh, I also have a favorite line. My favorite line was sometimes a person needs tact and kindness. Other times they need Han Solo. And
True.
it was just so perfect because she was discussing or she was trying to decide what she was going to do and she didn't want to go talk to Luke and his tact and kindness and soft spoken words and acceptance of everything. No, she needed to go talk to someone who's going to give it to her real.
Yeah. And he does come in and say the exact right thing.
Those all of that was like a little bit it seemed in character, but it was not quite as crass as I'd expect him to be. But maybe they're in their courting years at this point, so
He's
maybe
on
he
his
was
best behavior.
yes.
Yeah. I felt like what he said about like maybe that's where you come from, but that's not where you're going, or he said something along those lines. To me, that sounded like Sohan,
Yeah.
the way that he worded that. I thought that was great. Another scene too that was a pretty good one that also hit me in like a deep way was when Anakin learns that Padme's legacy has been like wiped away by Palpatine. And the way he reacts, it's almost like she's dying all over again.
That was sad.
And actually, okay, that scene, it does lead me to one of my questions that I wanted to ask you. So Anakin was really upset about the way that Padme's legacy is like gone. Do you think that Padme would have been that upset, or do you think that that's more of like an Anakin upsetness? Because in life, Anakin was very much about like the glory and like his reputation as being great. And Padme was more about like, well, what's the right thing to do? That's what I'm more concerned with is what's right. So do you think that Padme would have cared as much as Anakin did if she had known that Palpatine did this?
I don't think she would have. I agree with you with the fact that she cares more about the results. I think it would have made her sad to know her kids don't know who she is and they can't find anything of her.
True. Yeah. I think that that definitely would have been like if she had taken as much of an issue with it, it probably would have been more so about her kids, I agree. I don't really blame Anakin for being upset though, because I mean, she did deserve the recognition for everything that she did.
Absolutely. That was horrible. I see why the emperor would do it. But man, Leia uses the force a lot in this fan fiction. It is more of like a a feeling more than moving things with your mind and, rocks. But how did you feel about how much she relied on and accepted the Force?
To me, it made sense because, I mean, we do know that she's force sensitive, and, I would think that if somebody is force sensitive, then that would play, like, a pretty big part in just, like, the way that they experience the world.
Yeah.
So, what did you think about it?
I haven't seen it as much in canon, but I haven't read a couple of key books. Um, more of the recent ones. So I don't know. I read Bloodline, but I didn't read Princess and the Scoundrel. So I'm not actually sure how canon handles it, but it's like it was so intermixed with everything she does, and it wasn't just like, oh, I have a light feeling. That's the Force, and the Force is saying the thing, and I will trust it. I felt like it was a little bit exaggerated than what I would have expected, but absolutely agree with you. If it's like an extra sense, you're so used to having it, then of course you rely on it.
Yeah, like, I think that it makes sense that it's especially when it comes to, like, her trying to get a read on him and trying to get a read on, like, what's his deal in this conversation. It makes sense that she would use the Force to kinda, like, feel that out. I
Hmm.
mean, I know I would if I had that ability.
Right.
Yeah.
No one could lie to you.
Right, exactly. That would be a great skill. Okay, another question I had. So, would you have expected Force Ghost Anakin to be more at peace than he was in this fic, or do you feel like it made sense that he behaved in like a very similar way that Anakin behaved in life?
I had very mixed feelings on that. Because being a Force Ghost, we know that the Force Ghosts are in tune with the Force and kind of know all things now and come to accept everything. But Anakin, like you said, was not yet there. And maybe it's because his soul, spirit, force, whatever, was not yet ready to accept all of it and had a lot of trauma and um, past experience that had to work through still. So I was surprised about how skittish and unsure of himself he yet was with Leia. But then I think that might just be that I was expecting, someone to be like Darth Vader and forceful and forward. And then I thought back to how he was back in the Clone Wars, and it made more sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like because we see those moments of Anakin being like very charismatic and like you said, very like kind of in your face and like knows what he wants and like all of that. So, I mean, and we even before he turns, we see him being like that. But then we also see him being very insecure at times too. So like to me, it was believable. Even though I think my interpretation of Force Ghost would have been like that when you're a Force Ghost, now you're at peace, you know? But Anakin had a lot of things that were unresolved. So I could also see how like he's not at peace yet because he has unfinished business that he has to address first. Getting on good terms with Leia, maybe that's a part of that.
Yeah, just
So
like ghosts in quote unquote real life.
no quote unquote.
You're right.
Ghosts in
We're
real life.
plagued by spirits.
Ghosts are real. We're gonna debate it right now.
Oh gosh. All right, folks, buckle in. We're going to be here for 2 hours.
Oh god. Okay. Well, yeah, before I subject everybody to that, what are we reading next month?
Next month, we are reading Soul by the original Suki, which is another Raylo fan fiction, which we haven't done in a couple of months now. So that's exciting. And like I hinted at earlier, it is going to be a mature fan fiction. So that should be more fun. It is longer than the last couple, too. It's 40,000 words.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. It'll be nice to go back into the romance way of thinking. Well, we are on Instagram and YouTube. So our Instagram is one hell of a fanfic with a period in between every word. And we post all of our recorded videos on YouTube. If you prefer to watch and listen, then they're all there as well. So if you check us out on YouTube, please like and subscribe so that way we can kind of, I don't know, help our algorithm, as they say.
whatever those kids say these days.
Whatever the deal is, YouTube likes it if you like and subscribe. So that's something that we would appreciate. But thanks so much for joining, y'all. And I hope that y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys. Thanks so much for joining us at One Hell of a Fanfic. On this podcast, we discuss Star Wars fan fiction, but we do not own the rights to Star Wars or any of the written works we cover. We have no affiliation with Lucasfilm or the fanfic authors we credit for their work. For questions, please email us at onehellofafanfic@gmail.com.